Education is preparation for reparations.
Greetings. This is Esther Stanford-Xosei, and I am in conversation with Kofi Mawuli, and we are discussing a petition on change.org, and this petition is titled Stop University of Chichester's Axing of the MRes History of Africa and the African Diaspora. So this is a petition that has been making the rounds. It was started on the 13th of July on change.org, and the petition follows the news that Professor Hakim Adi's post is at risk of termination, and that all recruitment to the unique Masters by Research, which is the MRes, History of Africa and the African Diaspora, has been suspended. We hope you will consider offering your support and opposing the University of Chichester's actions by signing the petition. So alarmingly, overnight, the University of Chichester shut down an entire course. Notably, a comparable course is not offered by the University of Chichester or any other university in the UK. In fact, it's quite unique in the whole of Europe. Now, with this imposition, the University of Chichester is threatening Professor Adi, who is the first and only professor of the history of Africa and the African diaspora in Britain, with redundancy. So I'm joined by Kofi, who is going to be sharing some perspectives on this case. I mean, it's important to note that this petition and various letters and news articles have been written. There's been an article in The Guardian, The Voice newspaper, the University College Union has put out a statement. There's been programming on BBC Sounds, in particular coming out of Bristol, Talk TV with Trisha Goddard, the History Hotline podcast, Sputnik News. There's also been an early day motion that was put forward by Bell Ribeiro Adi MP, that is EDM 1514, that was tabled on the 19th of July. So this is a case that is gaining quite a lot of support and discussion, not only within African heritage communities, but across allied professions in terms of history, heritage professionals, many various individuals and representatives of organizations from different communities are joining in solidarity with this campaign. So Kofi, what are your thoughts about it?
Surprising as the announcement is, it is still not shocking, because this is just a repetition of many of the instances when institutions of white supremacy racism that have actually miseducated but also accommodated some of our African academics, even radical-oriented ones like Professor Hakim Adi, can then turn around and all of a sudden want to expunge them for the well-known reasons of feeling threatened by their works, and more importantly, within certain particular circumstances when the masses of our African people and other colonized people's resistance is on the upstage. They feel that the presence of those people within their institutions could transform those institutions into battlegrounds of our communities of resistance, taking their efforts of resistance into those territories and destabilize not just those particular institutions, but the entire academic establishment and also other spheres of the white supremacy domination. So they then turn around to try and expunge them. And I think that this particular case needs to be, we need to have an understanding of this case beyond the narrow framing of it in the petition. As welcome as the petition is in giving us the immediate facts surrounding the current situation of Professor Hakim Adi and the master's course that is designed and is teaching in terms of making the usual neoliberal arguments about it's not marketable, it's not making profit, it's not sustaining itself, and so on. Let us look beyond these pathetic excuses and look at the bigger picture. This is typical responses of institutions and agencies of white supremacy racism when they feel a bigger threat. Right.
So what is that bigger threat?
The bigger threat right now is that there is a reawakening of the masses of our African people in resistance because of the growing clamor and increasing potency of the international social movement for African reparations. The fact that it is also galvanizing the development of the People's Reparations International Movement and the discourses around African reparations, despite the counter-insurgency attempts by the likes of those in CARICOM, the University of the West Indies, the University of Glasgow, all these institutions of white supremacy, racist miseducation of our people for menticide that have been now drawn into muddying the waters of the reparations discourse against the kind of Pan-African revolutionary interpretation of reparations building on
this critique that you're making of these other institutions could similarly be levelled at the University of Chichester because it's not our institution, but yet it has hosted this very, very important course that has revolutionary potential.
But that is the whole point, that it is. You see, the course was acceptable because it is actually, to be quite frank, it's a very well presented, normal, non-threatening course to educate people on African history. The point is, with the growing self-conscientization of African people in resistance, with a current geopolitical situation where we even have regimes of neocolonialism having heads of government that are calling for a transformation of the global architecture of white supremacy, racist domination, calling for some dismantling of institutions of global appetite.
So you're talking here like President Ruto.
We're talking about
Assimi
Goita in
Ramaphosa in South Africa, Mia Motley.
Exactly.
Mia Motley
So
in
these people are
Barbados.
feeling the pressure of the rising grassroots movement to which, let's be frank, those of us in the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, those of us in the Stop the Maangamizi, which are genocide, ecocide campaign, our indigenous community chiefs in Matubuntu-Mitao, Global African Family Reunion International Council, various people are making this, including even our young people now organizing themselves in Aya Afrikan Learning community, the Pan-African Reparations EU Forum, and of course the emergence of the, through this work, the besting out, the all-party parliamentary group on African reparations in the British Houses of Parliament, and the community link that is developing around it, the resolutions that have been passed, borough councils like the London Borough of Lambeth and the London Borough of Islington Council, but also the whole City Council of Bristol. Now, all of this is creating a groundswell, particularly from the United Kingdom, that has seen the resistance efforts of African people always Pan-Africanized, is now there trying to utilize opportunities like what has been created in the University of Chichester. And it is precisely the danger, strategic and tactical move of taking our community resistance into all kinds of spaces, including the academic institutions of white supremacy racism, and the possibility of destabilizing them when you have initiatives like that of Extinction Rebellion International Solidarity Network and the XRB, the Change Affinity Network, supporting the Stop the Maangamizi campaign, the Maangamizi Educational Trust, to look at mainstreaming the grassroots agenda of resistance from our communities into something like the Planet Repairs Action and Educational Revolution, Praler. All of this is happening at this time. So we are seeing increasing resorts by the white supremacy racist establishment within and beyond the United Kingdom to fascism, the fascistization of spaces and the rolling away of spaces of democratic expression, right? Which we're seeing even in the courts in relation to the trial of the likes of Dr. Gail Bradbrook and some of the so-called climate justice activists. The denial of them of the right, the well-known established right to a trial by jury where jurors pass judgment on the basis of their own convictions, their own conscience. All of this is being eroded right now. And it is within these circumstances, the resort to fascistization, finds expression in academia. Because as Amilcar Cabral has pointed out in his masterpiece on national liberation and culture, anything to do with serious culture threatens fascism. Fascism doesn't want conscientization of their intellectual development, particularly self-determined development, to get to the point where they begin to utilize their right to cognitive justice, to think and act for themselves outside of the framework of the establishment. So, all of this is happening, yes. And the danger of this master's course, yes, in the University of Chichester now giving expression to this growing resistance, again, not just of African people, colonized indigenous peoples, not just in the global south of Africa, Asia, South Abiyala, but also so-called North America, in Australasia and other parts of Oceania. We are seeing the advances that scholar activists like Professor Tuhiwai Smith have made in Aotearoa, or so-called New Zealand. We are seeing the voices of Lydia Top and others in Australia. So all of this is creating a groundswell whereby geopolitically the global apartheid racism or white supremacy can no longer hold on to its insistence on having a unipolar world.
And so bringing that back to what's going on at the University of Chichester, I mean, it's interesting you're giving this kind of global geopolitical perspective on the situation unfolding, and you've spoken about this course being a medium through which many of these expressions can perhace
are already finding, because Professor Hakim Adi specializes in researching Pan-Africanism, has written quite extensively on the history of the Pan-African movement. His works pose unlike the works of many other academics who take little bits and pieces of our people's experiences and intellectualize on. Anything to do with the Pan-African movement harmonizes the struggles of African people, not just on the continent, but in the diaspora, a global whole. And this is the danger that's posed. So Hakim actually needs to wake up from my view of his sometimes quite myopic view of what he's trying to do. That he may be seeing it, as just a little thing that he's trying to do, and many people might see it that way, that he's trying to do in the University of Chichester. But Hakim is no ordinary academic. Hakim is well seasoned scholar, activist, researcher into Pan-Africanism. And therefore, when he carves out a space and is trying to actually encourage more scholars, particularly from our African heritage communities, to pursue higher education in particularly history, and beginning to interpret African history from our own Pan-African liberatory perspectives, at a time that those liberatory perspectives of Pan-African internationalism are connecting into the battles for a planetary-based action learning educational revolution. Come on, the threat that he poses. Hakim himself and all those who are signing the petition and commendably supporting him need to wake up and see what is really, really at stake here.
Well, I am privileged to be one of Professor Hakim Adi's students, PhD students. He is supervising a number of us. There are a number of MRes students who he is obviously in connection with also. And many of us may not see our work, our studies, our research in the context within which you're explaining it, this kind of big picture stuff. And certainly are just doing specific studies in the history of African people in the diaspora.
Yeah, well, that is what people need to wake up from. That, what you are tackling poses serious risks to serious players in global politics, right? People who wield immense power and are used to wielding power in, particularly recently, in a unipolar world. And when we have that unipolar world now being challenged seriously by the likes of rising People's Republic of China, by a resurgent Russia, by an alliance of global South and global North forces in the BRICS, then you have something seriously happening in the world where white supremacy racism can no longer take things for granted, right? And I always quote Regis Debray: the counter-revolution seems to learn from revolutions much more than revolutionaries themselves. They know what is happening. They know where this is going. So this cause that is now becoming one of the resources for the international social movement for African reparations. You're doing your PhD course on African reparations under the supervision of Professor Hakim Adi. And you're taking into that, distilling and bringing back into the grassroots of our international social movement for African reparations, knowledge produced by us within the course of our resistance. That cannot be taken for granted. So what I want to emphasize here is we are seeing an increasingly fascist response by white supremacy racism towards any opening of spaces anywhere for just democratic expression.
So when you talk
and this is nothing new.
Sure, but when you just want to stop a minute and just get you to further explain, when you talk about white supremacy racism, who and what are we talking about?
Education is preparation for reparations.